I would now like to begin part 2 of this presentation of Shomenuchi techniques. I would like to demonstrate the second group of irimi techniques. I believe we are perhaps the only group who practices irimi in this way. Irimi is usually done like this. The sword is a bladed weapon. In karate, it is called uchi hidari ode. We refer to it as the mine, or back of the ken. In karate, it is referred to as soto hidari ode. This is completely different. When the opponent attacks our head, we execute the technique this way. We do it this way, moving like this. When we do the technique, we absolutely do not do it in this way. In our training, we absolutely do not push back at the opponent. In dealing with an attack in Aikido, we do not block or stop our opponent. That is how an attack is dealt with in Aikido. So in Aikido, we do not move from this point in the direction of the opponent. We open this way. The hand comes to here in this manner and enters this way. Naturally, if Aikido is based on the principles of the sword, it must be based on correct principles. Various entering movements with the sword begin from this form, where both opponents raise the sword at the same time and parry the opponent's attack. Then from this position, they enter, and their swords lower. But our way of doing the movement is different. We do not adopt a kamae or ready posture, we simply stand like this. So we can enter when the opponent lowers his sword. Naturally, we can enter directly from here. This is our way of executing irimi. We have already entered at this point. In this case of a usual punch, we can avoid it, but we don't do it this way. What we do when the opponent punches is to enter directly. We are in this position. If you do it this way, the opponent will not fall down. In our way of doing the technique, when he attacks with shomen, we enter like this from below. So when he comes with a punch, we enter here directly. So naturally, this hand can't attack me either. He can't build up this point. So it doesn't endanger his life. He becomes unable to utter a word. I will return to this point later. This is what atemi should be. This is what atemi should be in Japanese martial arts. That is the method of entering we use. This is how we execute irimi. Next, using this as the basis, we will present kotegaishi, nikyo, and sankyo. Now we will move on to the practice of kotegaishi. This kotegaishi is exactly the same as the irimi we did earlier. We use the same movement as we did for the irimi we did before. There is almost no difference between this and the earlier irimi. Now we will take a look at this technique with Ken versus Ken and Ken versus Jo. Now we will move on to Shomenuchi Nikyo. With this technique as well, there are Ken versus Ken, Ken versus Jo, and sword drawing techniques. We performed this Nikyo in a manner similar to the irimi and kotegaishi we looked at earlier. Here, and then we turn. It's almost the same movement. We will now move on to the Ken versus Ken and Ken versus Jo techniques. Allow me to explain this a little. The Jo is in this position, and we break the opponent's jaw. Naturally, a strike here follows. However, we can't practice in this way. So we parry to his head to subdue him. This is how it's done. Then we come here. This Jo movement is similar to the Nikyo. The same form directly applies to the sword. We come here and then enter. It is exactly the same as before. Next, we come here from below. It is almost the same as the empty-handed movement. The empty-handed technique applies to the Ken and to the Jo. Now we look at the third type of irimi. In this irimi, the opponent strikes my head and I come here. I have already entered. I don't allow him to strike. When he strikes, we come to this position. This is the position. This is irimi nage. There are a number of ways of entering. There are various kinds of footwork. The one now is like this. So we come like this. In actuality, this is the sword raising. This comes here. If he punches, I come to his throat. Usually the hand is used to protect yourself. However, in Aikido, this is not done. The hand which comes into contact with the opponent is used to draw him out. This is the opposite of other kinds of martial arts. Japan's modern martial arts involve pinning, parrying, and pushing away. This has spread from Japanese martial arts all over the world. Our approach to Aikido is completely the opposite. The hand which makes contact is used to draw out the opponent. We don't use it to throw. That is the way it's done in Aikido. In the case of the punch too, the hand is not used to stop the attack. We use this hand to draw out the opponent. At this point, my strike has already contacted him. Without an understanding of this, I don't think one can understand the wonderful quality of Aikido. Many techniques emerge from these irimi movements. If it is true that you can throw an opponent in an instant, it means you can kill an opponent in an instant. However, today that would be a crime. When that happens in this world, one is killed. Our approach is, in an instant, in that moment of agitation, to cause both parties to reflect on the situation. In the previous irimi, we enter this way. This time, we enter from the opposite side. This time, it's different. This movement happens instantaneously. This is the movement. This is our way of executing irimi. According to the principle of irimi, the opponent is already checked in his attack. That is to say, you have to always be in a position to down your opponent. The opponent cannot attack me. You have to create this situation. It is because of this that it is Aikido. However, in martial arts like Kendo, Judo, or Karate, this principle is probably not understood. That's my view. We will now move on to kotegaeshi. This is exactly the same as the previous irimi. When he comes to strike my head, then I move my body here. I enter this way. I will now show the previous kotegaeshi and compare it using Ken and Jo techniques. In the previous kotegaeshi, we entered this way. Then we cut here. This time we do the opposite. We enter this way. Of course, this time we attack the opponent's throat. If we down the opponent, then that's the end of the technique. This is how we do it. Like this. Again. In this movement, we attack the opponent's jaw. Then we come here. Next, we attack the jaw. We attack the jaw. The jaw, like this. This is the kotegaeshi we are doing now. Now we will consider Sankyo techniques. There are two ways of doing Sankyo. We will divide it into two kinds and also show applications using the Ken and Jo. This Sankyo is almost the same as the basic movement. It's done this way. Then we come here. The importance of this basic movement is that it illustrates that atemi must be used in Aikido throwing and pinning techniques. Generally speaking, people do not understand these techniques. In a real situation, as I said before, we attack his head. Then we move this way and control him. This is the movement. In a real situation, this movement becomes a strike here. As to the distance, of course, we move in close in Aikido. Rather than the fist, you often use impi or uraken, that is, reverse strikes. In the old days, it was said that one could knock down an opponent with a 10-centimeter punch. Nowadays, in the karate world, there are very few who can do that. Aikido is supposed to be able to do that too. We have gone to this point. There is barely a space of 10 centimeters. There is no room to execute a punch. But this hand moves this way. It has 10 times the distance to move. The last strike is to a place in the body that cannot be toughened up. Everything needed to fell the opponent is included in this technique. This is the way it is done in Aikido. When looking at Shomenuchi, one might wonder what on earth the technique is. The key elements happen in an instant. The opponent comes here, like this. Actually, he doesn't make contact. In this way, we can cleanly control the opponent. Without doing this, the forward-looking thinking of Aikido to the effect that we can construct a new age by uniting with and leading the opponent's power will never come into being. Aikido is trying to realize an ideal for the future. The present trend is to completely block the future. This is the direction in which present-day Japanese Budo have been moving. Victory is in felling your opponent. In our way of thinking, to fell an opponent is to lose. Man's true way of life is based on protecting the life of fellow man. The purpose of Aikido training is to examine and verify this principle with your own body. Keeping that in mind, this is the manner in which we execute the technique. With the Ken, at this point, actually here, and we enter here. Then we blend with the opponent's sword, and then move here. We have already entered when the opponent raises his sword, and then we move here. Then we blend with his ken. Then we come here. We apply the same principle to the jo. The movement is exactly the same. Since this is a jo, it doesn't cut. At this point, we strike his jaw, and then to the side of his head. Once again. At this point, the opponent strikes and we lead him this way. Here we enter. Before we pin him, we must execute a strike here. Then we pin him here. That is how the technique is executed. Again, we'll show the movement with the ken and jo. First of all, I'll show the first Sankyo sword technique. This is taken from among the thrusting movements. Next, these are of course among the applied techniques. They are done in the manner of the Ikkyo-ura movement. Next, we'll demonstrate the techniques using the Ken and Jo. Naturally, these will be based on ski attacks. It goes without saying that we enter here behind the opponent. We enter this way here and then here. So it may be a punch or something else. Of course, you must already strike him when he comes. So we do it like this. So this movement comes over the opponent's head. This is the wrong way to do it. That's how they do it in karate. We're doing this to avoid the punch. We have to touch the opponent's body here. Actually, we must down the opponent before touching his fist. Therefore, we must bring our hand over his head. Because my hand is here, he can't punch or kick. So of course, we enter here and pin. This is how we practice the technique. When using a Ken or Jo, we do the movement against a thrust. Here too, before making contact, we come to his temple. Then here. Then his body. Finally, here. Before making contact, we come here, here, and then his arm, then the body, and here. This is a kind of hip training while holding the sword, like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 strikes. This is one way to demonstrate an Aikido technique. It is said that Aikido is a forgiving Budo. There are some people who will forgive once or twice, but there is hardly anyone who can forgive 3, 4, or 5 times. Forgiving is the highest ideal. Aikido is the spirit of one who can forgive many people. We think that this is something very important. If Aikido is a Budo of forgiveness, we must closely examine techniques with that concept in mind. By mastering these techniques, we can develop a tolerant character. This is the purpose of Aikido training. Once again. Since this is a Jo, it can't cut the body. When you're cutting with a live sword, it's effective to cut soft places. But in the case of the Jo, it's effective to strike hard spots. So for example, you strike the knees and places like that with the Jo. This goes without saying. When we use the Ken, we are using a dull blade, so it actually doesn't matter. In the case of both the Ken and Jo, of course, It is more effective than striking with the fist. That is how we approach the technique. To conclude, I would like to briefly explain two shimewaza or choking techniques. It's done like this. To explain this, it's actually not that difficult. You come to this position. In the old days, you did this. If you twisted the helmet, you broke the opponent's neck. This would result in instant death. It's extremely dangerous. Since we can't do that sort of thing, we go through the motion of choking the opponent. Of course, we come to here, and while striking the opponent's jaw, we bring him here. Since we can't do that, we come here. The thumb comes here. Then you twist him around to here. It's necessary to do it this way for practice. Please understand the technique in this way. Here's another technique. This is a similar technique. This time you stay in contact with him and come here. Actually, you would do this. Or poke his eyes. You come into the jaw, and one hand pokes his eyes. It's extremely dangerous. You'll understand if you try pressing here. This is a vital point. If this is cut even a little, air comes gushing out. You can't survive for even a minute. This point here. If you are struck here even with the empty hand, it will be totally effective. So we enter from the left side, and then to here. You shouldn't pull. The opponent is controlled by his own body weight. You don't choke him with your hands. It happens by the opponent's own body weight. It's like being hanged. You are choked by your own body weight. It's the opponent's body weight. That is how we execute the technique. So, we bring him around this way, and he comes to here. I think it's best to practice the technique this way. Today I have limited myself to an explanation of just Shomenuchi techniques. In our practice of empty-handed techniques, we apply the principle espoused by the founder that training in empty-handed techniques is the same as holding a ken or jo. The same principle applies to all martial arts. This is how the founder explained it. I think that is exactly true. If our way of explaining these techniques has been of some use, I hope that you will think about training according to these principles, and that this will be a benefit to the future of Aikido. Those are my thoughts. There are still many yokomen, katadori, sodedori, and ryotedori techniques. There are still many other ways of training. If there is the opportunity, I would also like to cover these areas of training. Thank you.